Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have you. This is Bisexuality and Pansexuality, Similarities, Differences, and Togetherness. It's a sold out show, so we're excited for you to have a seat. Obviously, there's replay, but we're so happy to have you here with us live. So I'll go ahead and get started, just do some introductions. We'll talk about the workshop content and we'll come back to that. But my name is Stacy Kelly. So if we can go to the next slide. I'm Stacy Kelly. I'm a vice president with Bank of America. I have worked for the company for 22 years, during which I have been out. I've worked with our LGBT organization within our company, which is LGBT plus Pride Employee Network, and have been a co-chair for Maine and New Hampshire for the last 6 or 7 years, and worked with our enterprise training development team. So on some of our global education initiatives, which is something that really makes me happy and proud. My day job, though, is as a vice president is with senior business control. So I'm a business control specialist. I work mostly in our consumer card underwriting division. I've also started working across products in underwriting. And it's an exciting job. So I consider myself kind of a business professional, an educator, and advocate. I also identify as bi and pan and polyamorous, but we'll talk a little bit more about our identity journeys in a little bit. But I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, the amazing Robin Oakes.
Hi, and I am so happy to be working with Stacy today. My name is Robin Oakes. I go by she and they pronouns, and I have identified as bisexual now for 45 years. So if it's just a phase, then it's quite a phase. I also identify as pansexual and queer, and because Stacy said I'm polyamorous, I'll say I identify as monogamous. And I live in Boston, and my work these days is as a full-time educator. I travel the world speaking about identity and sexuality with a focus on bi plus identities. And I sometimes think I have the best job in the world. And I'll now turn it back to Stacy.
Best job in the world. She does. I will say just my little journey here on how I got to work with Robin is watching her do her best job in the world in 2017 at Summit, where she became my shiro the moment I met her. And I feel very fortunate to work with her too. This is an amazing experience. So let's move on to the next slide. And we'll talk about what we're going to accomplish in our workshop today. So we're going to go over some key definitions. Robin has a lot to say on this topic. She's quite the expert. So she's going to give us a historical perspective. We'll talk about meaning and context, the bi versus pan debate. I think anyone who identifies as bi and or pan is certainly very aware of the debate. So we'll talk about that. We'll share our personal examples, just our identity histories and journey. And we really set quite some time aside because we wanted to engage you in some dialogue. And so we'll leverage the chat that is in Zoom if you happen to be viewing through Zoom. If you're viewing through Pathable successfully, well done you. We'll use the poll option there. So, and we do have a couple polls today to engage you further. So you can look for that in the poll section. All right, so we have quite a bit to talk about when it comes to definitions. So if we can go on to the next slide, and I'll leave it to Robin.
So I have been doing this type of education for a really long time. And one thing I've learned is that if you ask 100 people what the definition of bisexuality is, you will get maybe not 100 answers, but you will get several. And some of them will look dramatically different from one another. And the same is true for if you ask people what pansexual means, if you ask people what queer means, if you ask people what straight or gay means for that matter. And so that's a big challenge of language. So we're going to just start off with a quick introduction to two terms, bisexual and pansexual, and a third term, which isn't on the slide, but I just want to start with that one, the term bi plus. So I often use the term bi plus as a holding place for all of the different identities that people use to describe non-binary sexualities, to describe people who are attracted or who have the potential to be attracted to people of more than one gender. And when I say bi plus, that plus is real. That plus is meant to say that there are lots of different equally valid words. And one thing I've learned over time is that every single label is the best label for some people, and different labels are the best labels for other people. So let's start off with pansexual. So something really exciting happened in 2018, which was that Merriam-Webster Dictionary, or Merriam-Webster.com, decided that pansexual was one of its 3 words of the year. And every year at the end of the year, they announced 3 words, and those are their 3 words of the year. So they made pansexual one of their 3 words of the year. And this was pretty exciting. I was personally very happy about this because, it's one of my identities. So the definition of pansexual that they use is of relating to or characterized by sexual or romantic attraction that is not limited to people of a particular gender identity or sexual orientation. Also not solely homosexual or heterosexual, etc. And this was really exciting. I thought, oh wow, this is so cool because pansexual now is getting attention. And the reason that pansexual got all this attention, I think, is that Janelle Monáe, the singer, came out as pansexual. And apparently what happened is the Google searches for that word spiked, and it got a tremendous amount of media attention, which is awesome because more education is better, more attention is better. So I was happy about that. But I also had another response, which was, if you go to Merriam-Webster Dictionary and you look up bisexual in 2008, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you went to a Merriam-Webster Dictionary during that time and you looked up the word bisexual, what you would find is a definition that I actually don't like. Definition 1A is possessing characters of both sexes, and especially both male and female reproductive structures. And that's an old definition of bisexual, which, for example, would be used like bisexual flowers or things that, etc. The second definition, which is more the sexual orientation definition, is of relating to or characterized by sexual or romantic attraction to both men and women. And then the third definition is of relating to or involving both sexes. So the second definition, of relating to or characterized by sexual or romantic attraction to both men and women, does not resemble the definition that I use. And one of the things that has been used against bisexual people repeatedly by other people within the LGBTQ plus community is, well, bisexual is very binary. It reinforces binaries. It's a terrible word. It means just attracted to men and women. And there are more people than people attracted, are identify with other things besides that, and so on and so forth. And they'd say, look, it's in the dictionary. There's proof. So after getting inspired by pansexual being named one of the words of the year, I decided to start tweeting at Merriam-Webster. I thought it's time for them to update this definition as well. So I started tweeting, and I think I wrote something like, great that you did this, Merriam-Webster. Now maybe you'll update your definition of bisexual too. And I sent out a bunch of tweets over time, never got a single response. But a friend of mine who knows someone who works at Merriam-Webster actually did reach out to me. And I had an off the record conversation with someone there. And she explained how definitions are changed. And it was basically that they have to be in widespread use, and there has to be documentation and so on and so forth. So I thought maybe I've gotten it on the radar. We'll see what happens. Anyway, in 2009, what year is it now? It's 2019. Merriam-Webster made non-binary one of its 3 words of the year. And again, I was so excited because people identifying with non-binary genders is something that is happening more and more. And it was so exciting. And I thought, this is great because this attention will help educate people. But again, I felt that same sense of frustration, like, this is frustrating. They even have acknowledged this definition of like that gender is non-binary, and yet in the definition of bisexual, it still says to both men and women, which is a very binary construction. And so I tweeted out, Merriam-Webster, yay, really glad that you made non-binary your word of the year. Now maybe you'll update your definition of bisexual so that it's not And this went on and on. And again, I heard nothing. Um, I then reached out to GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, and because they do a lot of pop culture, social, cultural work. And I said, hey, can you help me? And they said, yes, we'll see what we can do. And so we collaborated and we wrote this really excellent letter to Merriam-Webster and heard nothing back. Anyway, that long story short, fast forward to a few months ago, about 2 months ago, I was preparing a program and I thought, let me go pull up the old crappy definition of bisexual that's in the dictionary, and then I can compare it to my new fabulous definition. And so I Googled it so I could take a screenshot. And I went to the page, and lo and behold, they had actually updated the definition. I just didn't know it had happened. So next slide, please. So the change that they made was also of relating to or characterized by sexual or romantic attraction to people of one's own gender identity and of other gender identities. That was much, much, much improved. I will also say that I'm still not crazy about some other parts of the definition, because like same sex and opposite sex put sex into a simple binary, et cetera. However, I'm so happy that they improved it. I am so happy that they improved it. So next slide, please.
Hey, Robin, thank you.
So this is the definition of bisexuality that I have been using for at least 10 years, I think longer. And it's a definition in which every single word is really important. I call myself bisexual because I acknowledge that I have in myself the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree. And this definition, every single thing is important. And I'm just going to call out one particular part of it, which is I call myself, because I really believe that identity is about self-naming. There are many people who have quote unquote bisexual behavior at some point or currently in their lives who don't identify as bisexual. This definition is really resting on the idea of our own agency, our own ability and freedom to name ourselves in a way that makes sense to us. So I'm going to turn it back to Stacey.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me jump in here, because the first time that I was introduced to this definition was at Out and Equal, and then went on to read one of your books, Getting By, an anthology, right, of people's coming out stories. But this definition right here, Robin, hit me like a lightning bolt, because I have called myself bisexual. I've been out since I was 16. I turned 50 this summer. So again, if it's a phase, it's a long one. But I haven't been able to find, and I have felt throughout my lifetime that I have been either battling within myself with my own, sort of biphobia, or just taking in other people's feedback about who I am and what my definition and what my reality is. And this, again, from the first sentence of I call myself bisexual, it hit me like, yeah, I identify as bi. I have been in relationships with, again, I don't have to catalog my history for people in order to stand firmly in my bi-ness. But when I do look back, I have had a lot of relationships with people who've been in the non-binary and trans communities. So to some degree, that idea of the binary has always been a struggle. And this definition bursts that, immediately, because it's just more than one gender. And not necessarily to the same degree, not necessarily in the same way. And it really, really spoke to me. So what I thought would be fun for our session is to ask people if they're having that moment as well. So if you want to migrate to the poll, our poll question for you, and we can stay on the definition slide, but if you can migrate to the poll, what we'd really like to know is, how many of you see yourself in Robin's description and definition for bisexuality? Does it fit, or does it feel like it fits your experience? And again, if you remove the word bi and just the, the definition and what she describes, a lot of people, it resonates for them. And so I thought we'd be, well served by taking a quick poll of our attendees and asking that question. And then if we can get some help from the producer on telling us what the poll response is. And the poll's under Pathable. So if you did have to view under Zoom, you may not have access to it. For that, I apologize. Just kind of comes with the technology this week. So I'm not sure if Deborah on staff or if Aaron or Crystal, if you can see the poll results and give us an idea.
I will get those for you in just 1 second.
Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate it. Shout out to our producer, Aaron Roberts, and also some assistance from Crystal Howard Dolliver, both from Bank of America, and then Deborah from Mountain Eagle. You guys are great teammates. Thank you.
And one thing I think I want to add right now is that we are not assuming that everyone in this session identifies as bi or bi plus or pan or anything else. I hope that that's not the case.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, the more diversity in this space, the better. Because I think that it's really important that people not just talk to themselves in their own identity group all the time, but that we have conversations across identities. And so if you don't identify as bi or pan or bi plus of any kind, you still, we're really glad you're here.
All right. So maybe we can move on, but Deborah can give us a count.
I'm giving them to you in just a second.
Oh, okay. No worries.
So 77% or 78 said yes, 21 somewhat, and 14 no.
Okay. All right. So I know we've got a lot of attendees, to your point, Robin, that are here to learn more about bi and pan. May not be in the bi plus space.
And by the way, there are 260 something people in this meeting.
Yeah.
Whew.
I know.
Hey.
It's okay. And some may not be able to get to the poll because of the Zoom thing. So that's okay too. That does give us an idea.
Yeah, somebody wrote in the comments that they think that that the no's also probably include people who would have put NA had that been an option.
Fair enough.
Anyway, shall we go onward?
Yes.
Okay, so a little bit of data. I love data because I think it really helps provide framing. One of the questions that gets asked very often is what % of the population identifies as LGBTQ+. My first answer is that we don't know. I honestly believe that we live in a country where there is so much discomfort and shame around the topic of identity and sexuality that I don't think it's possible to get completely accurate numbers. However, the data that we can get can still be very helpful and help us understand certain things. So this data that I'm going to show you first, it comes from Gallup. And Gallup does these telephone surveys, and which is already one limitation of the data, because I know that when my phone rings and I don't know who is calling, I don't answer. So I don't think I would be included in any kind of Gallup survey of random calls. That said, this is a survey where they call people up and they ask them lots of questions, and might be like, how many automobiles do you have in your home? How many adult children live in your home? It's whatever, just a bunch of questions. And in 2012 through 2017, they also included the following question: do you personally identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? In 2012, 3.5% of the respondents said yes. This number increases every year that they ask the question, such that by 2017, the number has increased to 4.5%. So that's a 30% increase over between 2012 and 2017. Next slide, please. When you break it out by age, it actually gets really interesting. In fact, I think it gets more interesting. This is a slide where it's divided by age cohorts. So the bottom line, the green line, is a group that they call traditionalists. And traditionalists are basically people born between the world wars. So people who, even by my standards, I would count as old. And so for people at that age group, it's 1% said yes. If you go one generation younger to millennials, which is my generation, it's 2%. If you go up one more generation to Gen X, it's 3 point something percent. Anyone seeing a pattern already? If you go up one more generation to millennials, people born between 1980 and 1999, that's where the chart gets really interesting. In 2012, 5.8% of the respondents said yes. By 2017, the number is up to 8.2. So if we went back to the earlier slide, which we don't have to, Gen X owns a little bit of that increase, but the millennials own almost all of it. So I think one thing that we can conclude from this is the younger you are, the more likely you are to be willing to say that you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Next slide, please. Here's a different survey. This is a general social survey, which is a large population survey based in the United States. And in this survey, this is breaking out lesbian, gay, and bisexual to say who identifies as what. And it's a 10 years, they did the same question over a 10-year period. So what you see is that lesbian and gay starts in 2008 at 1.6%, 10 years later, it's 1.7%. So basically it's holding steady. The number of people identifying with the words lesbian and gay is pretty constant over time. The word bisexual, however, starts off at 1.1%, and 10 years later, it's 3.3%. So that number triples in that same 10-year period. And if you look again, like if you look at the 2008, lesbian and gay identified people are about 2/3. Bisexual is about 1/3 of the people that they surveyed. If you move to the other end, bisexual people are 2/3 and lesbian and gay is 1/3. And again, it's not because lesbian and gay lost numbers, it's because bisexual gained numbers. So what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in the number of people identifying as bisexual. Next slide. Next slide, please.
I'm trying, it froze.
It's
Sorry.
okay, Erin.
Also, while we're waiting, I'll say that this control queen has a very hard time not controlling everything. Because I'm used to like always controlling every single bit of everything. So now, instead of asking people, how do you identify? What if instead of saying, what do you identify as, what if we ask people, where do you identify? So where are you on a sexuality continuum? And luckily, YouGov has done just that. So this is a sexuality continuum with one end being other sex attracted only, other gender attracted only, in old-fashioned terms, opposite sex, but I don't use those terms, and the other end being same sex or gender attracted only. So YouGov did a survey, and it's an internet survey, and here's what they found. Next slide, please. So this is actually broken out by age cohorts. The right-hand side is people who are 55 and above currently. In that age cohort, 84% put themselves on the straightest number. 7% put themselves on the gayest number, and only 7% put themselves on all the other 5 numbers combined. But if you go to the left and look at millennials, only 55% put themselves on the straightest number. So that's a dramatic change. So 29% of people, 29% more of people, you get the idea. 84% on the straightest number of people 55 and above. For millennials, it's only 55%. So it's a 29% difference. 3% put themselves on the gayest number, and 34%, so a full third, put themselves on the middle 5 numbers. And if we go in the middle, because I don't want to be binary in my framing here, the people in the middle are at midpoint between. So you see this kind of trend going as you get younger, you get less binary in how you understand your own sexuality. Next slide, please. So this is a survey that comes from the Trevor Project. Trevor Project is a youth-serving LGBTQ+ organization in the United States. And they did a rather large study of LGBTQ+ youth. And within that population, what they found among their respondents was that about a third identified as gay or lesbian, about a third as bisexual, 17% is pansexual, 10% is queer, 3% not sure, 2% straight. And I'm guessing some people may be thinking, why would LGBTQ plus youth identify as straight? I would say there are two possible reasons that I can think of immediately. One is some of the youth are trans identified, and you can identify as transgender and also straight. And also, there are many people who identify as with the word straight who don't identify as completely straight. So that's also a possibility. Next slide, please. So this is also from Trevor. What they found is that the youth in their survey identified with more than 100 different combinations of terms. More than 100. And by the way, the same was true of gender. They also had more than 100 different terms for gender. And these are just some of the terms. And I want to say, I work with youth all the time. I do education on this topic. And this list actually, I had to look up one word on this list. And just and that's one of the things that I think is really important, is that the list is constantly growing. People are very creative in the words that they come up with to describe themselves. And one of the big generational changes that I'm seeing is that back in the olden days when I came out as bi, people were using identities more as proper nouns, like, what are you? I am a
Right.
lesbian. I am a bisexual. I think what's happening now is that younger folks tend to be using these identities more as adjectives. I identify as, I go by, I call myself this. And they may say I am, but I think underneath that, many of those same people mean I identify as. And if you can think of labels as adjectives, that means you can have more than one. That means that you can use maybe different adjectives, different labels in different situations. I've talked to so many people who say, well, yeah, I use the word pansexual or queer, but when I'm talking to my grandmother, I say I'm straight. Or when I'm talking to my uncle, I say I'm bisexual. Like, that people use different words to communicate with different people. So thinking about identities more as a tool for communication instead of this essential thing that we are is definitely a generational difference in understanding sexual orientation.
And that's something that you and I spoke a lot about, Robin, is that these are adjectives rather than nouns, and we aren't in discrete boxes. There's something about my fluid nature and my bi and panness that when people try to put me in a box, that's when I start throwing elbows. I don't like to be fenced in. And looking at this list, I can speak for myself. There's at least 4 on this list that I connect with. I've used the term bi for so many years that even though I now understand that a more progressive definition of pan is available, that really encompasses more about the spectrum of attraction and sexual feeling that I get, that's a word that connects with me a little bit more. But the term bi is also more open as definitions have evolved. So I tend to drop the sexual piece of it, especially in a business work environment, because I also identify as gay. So, I don't have to use, when I look sometimes at my gay and lesbian, business partners, they don't have the word sexual attached to their term anymore. And we're already fighting a hypersexualized, sort of stereotypes and biphobia. So I tend to go with bi and pan. But there's a few on this list that I connect with.
Just
Robin,
for people who don't know one of these, if there are words on this list that you don't know, that's probably predictable. And then what I suggest is that after the session, not during the session, like write down the words and then ask Mother Google later, and she will probably provide. And then the other thing I want to say is I want to share this expression that I have found so helpful in reminding me what matters. It's identity, not you-dentity.
Yes.
It's identity, not you-dentity. That identity is a personal thing, and each person should really get to decide what works for them.
Well, monitoring the chat just through Zoom, I've seen some people point out that they've been told by other people that they can't use terms that they identify with. And, that is something that is, I think all of us in the LGBT community struggle with and have struggled with, being told who we are, what we really think, how we feel, what our attraction really is. Sometimes you're told it's a phase, you'll grow out of it, it'll pass. Um, and I know these things that I'm saying bring up pain points for people, which, I'm sorry that you've had that pain. I get choked up because I've had that pain too. Um, so when I say that I identify as bi, and I'm attacked on social media by somebody who is clearly also a wounded warrior out there in our community, feeling very passionate about their feeling towards pansexuality being a more inclusive term, I think that those are moments where I really have to step back and I just get somewhat disappointed in our community's efforts to argue within ourselves when the fight is out there. Fight's in the White House, fight is outside of our community. We need to come together. We need to stop being part of the problem and using the terms of our oppressors and telling other people how they should identify and what terms they should use. And I just think what you've said, Robin, is so eloquent. It is identity, not you identity.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to throw in right now. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it now or later, but I want to address the bisexual versus pansexual debate,
Yes.
which I think it's tied in with what we're talking about, which is the whole idea of identity policing.
Yeah.
You can't call yourself if you haven't this, or if you aren't that, or if you are this, this is your experience and this is what you should call yourself. Another phrase I really like is "don't shit on me and I won't shit on you."
Oh, like
Um,
that.
that I think that one of the reasons that those debates happen is that we have all been hurt. All people who are sexual minorities have been hurt. We've experienced a great deal of erasure, of pain, of not being validated, of people telling us that we're not what we experience ourselves to be.
Yeah.
And then the questions about whether we belong or whether we don't belong. And I think that there's an expression: hurt people hurt people. And I really believe that a lot of the stuff that happens comes from a place of pain, that we feel like we've been dismissed, we haven't been respected, we haven't been recognized, and then we're just like so frustrated. And oftentimes there's a sociological term or psychological term: horizontal hostility or horizontal oppression. The idea that hurt people often take the pain that they're experiencing and transfer it onto other people. My friend Warren Blumenfeld used the analogy of an abused child who goes and beats up on their younger sibling, and then the younger sibling, and their frustration, goes and kicks the family dog. Like that, we cause harm out of our own place of pain. And what I would say about all this is, what if we took all of our energy, because we have a lot of it, what if we took all of our amazing energy, and instead of arguing over which one word everyone should use, or instead of trying to regulate other people's choice of words, what if we took that energy and used it to hold space for all complex and non-binary identities? Like, what if we did that? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? I would love to see asexual folks, partnering with bisexual and pansexual and queer and also straight and gay people, like all of us. Like, what if we all just said, no, 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 everybody gets to decide their own label? And what if we
Yeah.
all work together to create a space where that's something that we can do together? And if we did that, we would be formidable. And I just think we'd all be a whole lot happier.
Yeah. Great. So, so in the poll I did, and I just don't think the polls are going to work with us for as many people are in Zoom. And but if you want to participate in the poll, you're welcome to. Just from this list, if there are folks that where 4 or more of these terms kind of speak to their experience, or 2 or more speak to their experience. The point of that exercise being, much as we've discussed, is that these are adjectives, they're not discrete boxes. You do get to decide for yourself. Your identity is just as individual as you are. And And that's a beautiful thing. That's a welcomed thing. I was watching some in the chat, and I think we'll probably come on to this more in the question and answer space. But I think sometimes the bi community, or for folks whose individual experience is that they are very attracted to masculine men and feminine women, but very specifically one or the other. If that's somebody's individual experience, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, I have never once in my lifetime entered into a debate with my gay male friends that they're women haters because they are not attracted to women. It would never even occur to me to have that debate with them because I accept them for their identity and attraction. But yet, as a bi individual, I have certainly been set upon for even the term bi, which to me again encompasses non-binary trans. That's been my love pattern and experience. Androgyny, there's nothing more attractive to me. That's just me. So, but I have had, some very pointed, acrimonious conversations with folks who think that I am being exclusionary, that I'm being gendered, or I'm gendering, and my attraction is exclusive, and therefore I am some level of, I don't know where I would fall, bigot or racist, but that's not my experience. That's not who I am. And it is perplexing to me that even in the pan environment, people seem to feel like it is okay to test us and demand or point at us about what we do or don't experience in our individual attractions. And I think you've spoken to some of that, Robin, but I know with your world travels and your speaking experience, I'm sure you've had questions along this line before, and just wondered if you had some additional thoughts on how to handle those feelings.
Well, I think that when we get into
I also have seen a couple of questions that just say, can we very, very clearly identify pan versus bi from some folks who I think need that to take better part in this dialogue. So can we take one step back and do that and then dive into Stacey's fantastic question?
Sure. What I would say about that is that I identify both as pan and bi. I think that they are not the same thing, but they're overlapping. They're different but overlapping. I think the words bi, pan, queer, a lot of the words that are on this list in front of us are overlapping. They're not completely distinct things. For me, the word pansexual, when I think of the word pansexual, and again, ask 100 people exactly what that means, you will get multiple answers. When I think of pan, actually, the way I like to think about it is I think about panorama, like just kind of wide range, like a broad screen, a broad field of possibility. I know pan also, comes from all, and so I just think of across a wide range of, and I know that for me, I've been attracted to people of more than one gender, and in fact, more than two genders. I've been attracted to people who are non-binary and gender fluid and so on, and agender and other things. So for me, the word pansexual works. It describes me. The word bisexual, I think, has more of a history. The word pansexual actually started coming into common usage around 1990-ish.
Yeah.
And before that, it was not in common usage. And so it's a newer word. The word bisexual has a longer history. I am kind of personally, I like the word bisexual, not because it's the best word, but because I have personal associations with it, because I fought like hell to make sure that, to fight for that word. I've done a lot of work on that word. So it has a lot of history. It has a lot of personal meaning for me. But honestly, it's no better or worse than the word pansexual. And, I think I also said the word queer works for me too. So I think what underlines all this is that because even with any given word, there are multiple definitions depending who you're talking to. So what I would suggest is that when anybody says how they identify, I would do two things. First, I would thank them, because coming out is scary. Speaking your truth out loud is scary, especially when you're not sure, what kind of reception you're going to get. So I would say that I would say, thank you so much for telling me how you identify. And I would mean it. And then the second thing I would say to them is, if they were someone I had a personal relationship with, I'm not talking about someone on the bus or, in the supermarket, but if it was someone I actually had a personal relationship with, I might also say, would you be willing to tell me more about what that identity means to you? Once we've had that latter conversation, then I know what they mean. But until we've had that conversation, I sometimes think of identities as these little name tags that we put on, but they're not the whole conversation. They're just a doorway to the conversation or just a little placeholder. But all of us, I think, have complex understandings of what our identity means. So if I wanted to know what Stacy meant, I might actually say, Stacy, what do you mean when you use that word? Would you be willing to tell me?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important thing about identity.
Thanks for sharing that, Robin. So we wanted to share a little bit more about our identity journeys, because I know we've thrown a lot of terms around in the ways that we see each other, but there's a long life that we've lived that got us to those places and to those understandings of ourselves. I'll take a stab at it first. So as I said a little earlier, I came out when I was 16, but I've really known since I was 11 or 12. I was in love with my two best friends. I just have feelings that I knew were emotional and loving for Roger Klein and Joanne Barry. And then, throughout high school, just came to understand myself as being not in a box, and having feelings that were romantic and sexual that were in a spectrum. So my first job was doing drag makeup, working in a local theater, and I came out to my girls and they were like, oh, we know. So, that was my welcoming to the community, if you will. I was already, stealthily hanging out near my people as much as I could because I knew that that's where I fit. But I have had in the working experience, who I'm dating and being out and being open, is that's just I don't know. I think I was born without some shame because I'm just who I am and love it or don't. So I've been out at work really for the last 30 or so years. One of my prior employers, I had been married to a man and that marriage dissolved and I met my new person at work, which was awkward because I usually don't do that. And it was a woman. And I went through a terrible experience of harassment and, everything inappropriate that a company could do, that company did, pulling us both in, talking to us together about our relationship. We weren't to break together. We weren't to go to lunch together. We had people watching us to see if we, touched hands. If we got out of the same car, it was a rumor mill. We were accused of creating the rumor mill just by our sheer existence. And the whole time I'm fighting for agency and space there. But everybody's just assuming I'm a lesbian and I just, arrived at that decision. And so I'm still trying to explain myself. And we finally both left that company and moved out here where I live in Maine. And I came to work for Bank of America. And so I've worked here now for 22 years. But when I started the first 3 or 4 years of the company, I was with my female partner and everybody accepted me from day one. And it's been a great experience. And then that relationship fell apart. And then I started dating a man and I had the experience in reverse. And it had moments of awkwardness, people that you thought were your friends who came to be very comfortable with you when you were the appearance of being in a lesbian relationship, but still the whole bi conversation was still lost on most people. Losing your friends again, but for the reverse reasons, having people welcome you and they're so happy for you in your new relationship. And when you know what that means is they're just so happy that you're not gay anymore. So that was an interesting experience. So my journey all along has been that I'm bi, but the whole time trying to explain to people what that means. But my partners have been non-binary. I've had a long-term, very loving relationship with a person who came out as trans in the course of our relationship. So when you say in the late 90s, when I started hearing this term pansexuality and understanding it's a little bit broader definition of irregardless or regardless of gender, it just felt like it fit a little bit too. But I just cannot give up bi for me, because more than one gender is exactly how I see myself and the term that I feel the most affinity for. So I, openly identify as bi and pan now, so that I can use that more inclusive language and know that I'm speaking also to some of my younger teammates and partners. When I'm describing myself, I'm hoping that that meaning is coming across to them a little bit better by using both terms. So it's a little bit more about my journey. Polyamory is another thing, but it's a completely separate conversation because it has nothing to do with bi or pan. It's how I arrange my relationships. So we'll leave that for another day. Robin, you want to talk a little bit about your journey?
I'm going to keep it really, really short. Well, short for me. So I guess what I'll say is that I grew up in a heteronormative family like most people, and I just took for granted heterosexuality. I also grew up before the internet. So yeah, so not so much information. When I grew up, there was not a single LGBTQ plus character on television, period. Like, it was a different world. But what happened for me is I started college, fell head over heels in love with a woman, whoops, and had to reevaluate kind of, what does this mean? I'm having this crush. What does this mean? Am I a lesbian? Am I straight? Am I what? And I don't know where I found the word bi, but I had it in my brain. And I was like, what does this mean? And what am I? And I went through all this kind of questioning, and it didn't take me long to realize that I was definitely bi, because that my previous attractions toward guys had been real, and my current attraction toward this woman was super extremely real, because it was overwhelming my entire life. And by the way, I never told her, just for the record, but it was like a huge central part of my life for years. And after I came out to myself, I got stuck in the space between knowing and being. I knew who I was, but I didn't know how to be that thing in the world. Like, I didn't know how to be a bisexual person in the world. I was 100% terrified that if I told anyone, I would be rejected, that no one would love me anymore. This was not all based in reason or logic. It was fear, and it was partially based in some, like, it's not completely illogical, but it was definitely magnified and augmented by fear. Anyway, finally, 5 years later, a coworker came out to me one evening. We were doing an overnight shift at this, we were working at a group home, and she came out to me, and I blurted out, "So am I." And that was a huge moment for me. And by the way, that's for me the power of coming out. If you come out to other people, you can be a beacon. Like, you can really serve as a possibility model and a beacon. And like, thank goodness for Joanne, like this woman who just said this thing, and it just like opened the door for me. Because once I came out, I felt so relieved. I felt so much better. And it began the process of me coming out to lots of people. Coming out at work was challenging. Because I was worried that it would get in the way, it would distract people from my professionalism, that they wouldn't take me seriously, that they would think I was talking about sex when in fact I was talking about identity, like all this stuff. It was hard, but I finally did come out at work. And again, I think I served as a beacon for some other people. And I ended up, to the extent that I ended up co-founding Harvard University's LGBT faculty and staff group, and our ERG. And anyway, so that's the short version of my story. Somebody in the chat asked me to tell one story, which I will share, because then we're going to go right into Q&A. So about what bisexuality means and how it means different things to different people. I was sitting in my house with my friend Alberto, and we're sitting in my living room. I'm at one end, he's across the room. And I remember this, I was sitting on the couch with my legs crossed, holding a pillow in my arm. And I said to him, "Oh, Alberto, we bisexuals," meaning him and me, "we just love people. We don't see gender." And Alberto turned, he looks at me and he said, "What?" And I said, "We don't see gender. We just love people." And he's just like going like, no. And I said, "Well, what? Like, what are you trying to say?" And he said, "Honey, Robin, honey, I see gender." He said, "For me, attraction is all about gender." He said, "I'm attracted to football players and cheerleaders." And And then he said, "Viva la diferencia," like long live the difference. And then he looks over at me and he said, "And Robin, you would be way too butch for me." And I still remember this because I said, "Hey," and I threw my pillow at him and he caught it and we laughed. And that was the end of that conversation. But after he left, a couple hours later, I'm sitting at my kitchen table trying to think, like, what did he just tell me? What did he just tell me about his own experience of identity? And I realized that for him, like, he's attracted to male, masculine men and female, feminine women and nothing else. Like, his bisexuality is very, very much the extremes lining up around those three things. And for me, I thought about, like, well, what about me? Like, what am I attracted to? And I realized that I'm attracted to androgyny, and it doesn't matter what kind of package it comes in. Like, I love people who are gender ambiguous. I love people, if you walk down the street and someone's walking in front of you and you can't tell what their gender is, I like, that's everything to me. Like, I'm attracted to boyish women and guys who are total sissies, the kind of guys who everyone else reads as gay. Like, those are my guys. And so I was like, wow, and we're both bisexual, but we don't mean the same thing. And I think that's why, and again, that comes back to the idea that if you really want to understand what someone means, you do need to maybe have a conversation, because his comment opened up my brain about, like, even what bisexual means, because I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I had the definition, and he kicked that door wide open. So thank you, Alberto. And I think, should we go to the Q&A now?
Yeah, I think I'm watching some of the dialogue, and which is great, because this is part of it's probably one of the best parts of doing a workshop like this, is connecting all of these amazing minds. And so people are sharing ideas and sharing thoughts in the chat, and I think that's incredibly valuable. What Robin and I want to ask, though, is what's on your mind? It might be things that you're taking away from this workshop to your ERGs at home. Maybe some things that you want to take back to your organization. Might be a question that you have for Robin or I about our experience, or Robin has a catalog of worldly experience that she can share. So we'll leverage the chat and the poll question section from Pathable. And we'll rely on Erin and Crystal and Deborah to help us along with that. So maybe one of you three can grab a question for us and shout it out.
And before you start, I just want to point out that I
Crystal.
just posted in the chat that the current issue of Bi Women Quarterly, the theme is out at work or not. So it's directly related to the summit. And we offer free digital subscriptions to anyone, any gender and orientation who's interested in reading it. And it's all in the chat.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. A question back to your slides, Robin, that show the really stark differentiation amongst age groups. So the question was, spectrum is a fairly new construct. So how much do you think that factors into the differences between the age groups?
I think it's very much about, like, I think there's been a lot of cultural change, and most of that change has started with younger people and is filtered upward into other generations. So it certainly has affected and touched other generations, but maybe not in the same degree. So, when I talked to my 15-year-old neighbor who came out as bi when he was 12, his frame is so open. His frame is so different. He has a kid in his class who's trans. Like, it's nothing is any big deal for him. Like, he knows numerous people who identify as trans. He has a friend who identifies as non-binary. A lot of his friends identify as bi or gay. It's like, it's a whole different frame. And I think that those of us who grew up in a much more restrictive experience have to kind of do relearning and kind of remedial work to catch up. And we're certainly, the conversation isn't entirely only young people, but I do think that they're the drivers, and I'm entirely grateful to, like, all the students who have helped me, like, shift my own frame and open up my mind and forced me to be more inclusive in my thinking and more open and more non-binary. But I think non-binary in general is something that is on the upswing. Non-binary gender, non-binary sexual orientation, non-binary race, like that, anything, like, that things are much more complex than, just A or B, that there's a whole alphabet of possibility.
Yeah, I'm noticing Nicole just shared, that being in a opposite sex marriage and being bisexual has its inherent challenges. I am in an opposite sex marriage. My spouse and I have been together for about 17 years, but he's known all along actually met me initially when I was with my prior partner who was female. So he's always known that I'm bi. And then there have been times where, he's corrected people who try to refer to us as, anything other, or refer to me as I'm straight now. He's like, oh no, she's bi. He says that he's in a bi marriage, which sometimes is really refreshing to hear. Not that I want to take his straightness away from him. But again, he's my champion, which is an amazing experience. But yeah.
Another question, how might we encourage more bi men to come out at work? Like, there's the very little value proposition is what was attached to that question.
Yeah.
I think it's harder for bi men to come out. There's a tremendous amount of dismissal and denial of their experiences. That's one of the reasons that I decided to co-edit that anthology, because I thought bi men get erased all the time, and I don't approve. Like, I don't like what I'm seeing, and I really want them to be able to feel visible. I guess just for bi men, what I would say is just remember that if you do come out, you're going to be a beacon for other people, and just the educational power of that. I also think that silence is very costly. Silence, while it may protect you from direct, attack, whether it be verbal or real or physical, it also is tremendously costly. Silence is a burden. Silence is exhausting. When I came out as bi publicly, I felt as though a weight that I didn't even realize I was carrying was, lifting off of me. Like, I felt lighter, I felt better. But I guess it's just remembering that there actually are a lot of bi men, that one third of not straight men identify as bi and 2/3 as gay. For women, it's 2/3 as bi and 1/3 as lesbian. But there
I'll just,
a lot.
yeah. And I'll interject that the rest of us, need to carry some of that water for them. So be the galactic ally that you have always needed in your life. Be that for them. So when you hear bi erasure, when you hear biphobic comments from within your ERG, within the community, shut it down. Speak up for them. Actively go looking for and create space for, ask for those voices from bi males specifically, and be direct that you're looking for a bi male voice to speak out, and then make a platform for them. Give them the opportunity to step up and step out, and then protect them and help them along.
There's a question that Heather has raised hand in Zoom. Can we call Heather? I don't know if this tool will allow that, but we could try.
I just asked Heather to type it in because
Okay.
I don't think we can get her audio.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't, unfortunately.
Heather,
Yeah,
type
that's the
it in.
challenge all week. Yeah.
There was another question about, how to deal with being bi and having both male identified and female identified people not want to date you. Like, how do you deal with the ambiguity of that, or the challenge that may be? I would say find other people, but anyway.
Yeah, you're not my people. I'm all about find my tribe. You want to date me? I don't want to date you either. Find somebody else.
So not attractive.
My
sassiness gets me in trouble. Robin, you take this one.
Here's one thing I would say is that underneath comments like that are a lot of assumptions. Right. And I would ask people, what is it? Like, if I heard someone say, I would never date a bisexual person, I would say, well, right. what is it that you think it means to identify as bisexual? And I would actually try to do a little bit of basic education, because, identifying as bisexual is not telling anybody about your current sexual activity, your sexual history, or even your romantic history or romantic current experience. Like, it's just saying how you understand yourself. And luckily, when I met my wife, she said, when we went on our second date, and I thought we need to have the conversation, the question that she asked me was, would you be willing to tell me more about what it means to you to identify as bisexual? And I thought, this one is a keeper.
Yeah,
and I did.
Until you did.
Season 23 of our rom-com. Like, it was the most brilliant question, because again, like, people think they know what these words mean, but they don't. And just like, so I think asking, like, trying to figure out what's the question underneath the statement.
Which is
Rather, what are the assumptions underneath people's statements and challenging them to think more clearly. I think we are actually at time.
We are at time. So I just want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you, Robin, for being an amazing teammate and co-host for this session. Thank you to Aaron and to Deborah and to Crystal for helping us field the questions through chat and co-producing today. Please, if you haven't, the newsletter information, Robin's book, 2 books, but the first one, if you haven't read it, Getting By, it's a seminal work. It is life-changing if you can pick it up and read it.
And we're going to stay on for a little bit because we have some time before they actually terminate the session. So if people want to continue the chat amongst yourselves, and also if you want to ask us anything else, we're still here. The session is formally adjourned.
It is. It
We are
is.
still here.
I'll put a
And we
plug
will
in for the 4:30 session, which is by women of color or a person of color and women, 3 strikes. So if you want to continue some of this dialogue, that one starts at 4:30 and I'll be on that with Sharita McClellan and Isabel Porras.
Yes, I will be there too, listening.
Okay.
And one other thing I guess I just want to say is there have been other sessions already at the summit, and there will be other sessions in the future, like during the rest of this week. And they're all really good, and you can actually go listen to them. They're all recorded, and if you click on a workshop, even if you didn't attend it, you can still, I think you can still,
Up to 3 weeks.
you can still
Yeah,
watch.
they're going to keep everything open. So that's a great point. Share with
And
your
I'm gonna
friends.
go back and watch Resting by Face tomorrow morning.
Oh, that one is awesome. You'll love it. It's really,
That's
I was
fun.
able to get in on that one. But yeah, this one was a closed session eventually because it was, tapped out with. So share with your friends. They can watch it on replay.
Here is Heather's question. How do we approach etiquette with people in teaching people about how to approach language? The much awaited question.
Ooh.
Yeah, etiquette, that's you, Robin.
I guess the first thing I try to always remember is that very few people in this country have been given a great education about LGBTQ plus identities or experience or anything else. And so most people are coming at this subject without a lot of access to information. And I just try to remember that people may ask things that feel offensive, but these people are probably not trying to be offensive. They just don't have the language or the vocabulary or the familiarity, and that most questions that people ask are actually real questions. They just really don't know the answer. So that makes me less angry and mean and, and makes me more able to take in their question, in a gentle, open-minded way. But I think, again, some just basic information, speaking to people with respect, and assuming that they do have good intentions, unless it's really clear that they don't. Trying to figure out what is it, again, what are people assuming underneath, what is it they're missing in their information? So I just try to help them fill in the gaps and the stuff that they haven't been taught, and appreciate that they're trying to learn.
Yeah. Always assuming and starting with kindness and assuming that they had the best intentions, even when it's somewhat clear that they didn't. That's actually how I handle when people say inappropriate things in the work environment around my bi-ness, is I will immediately go to this place where I've assumed the very best scenario for them. And then I let them kind of recognize that they didn't and sit with that for a second. But it just diffuses the situation and it creates opportunity for growth and continued dialogue as opposed to, shutting it down, because nothing can grow from there. Yeah.
Another question was, and Stacy, this is a good follow-up to what you just said, and maybe you can model the exact response you would have, but several people have said, how do you navigate coming out as bi and then having someone say something completely inappropriate to you or ask a completely inappropriate series of questions, almost like you need to give them your history and details in order to prove that you're bi?
Yeah. So setting boundaries with people about what's appropriate to talk about in the workspace and what's not is kind of a hobby of mine. So when I say I'm bi and pan, and then somebody's like, so you're into like threesomes and stuff like that, and be like, gosh, Paul, I'll just say Paul, Paul, you and I have a really great working relationship together, but we don't know each other on that level. That question is incredibly personal and inappropriate for the work environment. I'm not going to dignify it with an answer. But if you want to talk about more professional related things in relationship to my bi and pan identity, be thrilled to have that conversation with you. Little Oreo cookie.
Yay. What about advice on coming out as bi to your current partner? So if that's something you haven't had a conversation about.
It's been a while. I think being authentic about what your attraction is, and what you need them to know. For each person, where they've come to this aha moment of their bi-ness is probably very individual. So if you came to it because you now have feelings for someone, that is completely separate from your bi identity. That's a conversation of, I have feelings for someone else. So keep them separate would be my advice.
And I think some people come to their understanding of themselves as bi or bi plus or pan, as when they're already in a relationship. In that case, it's new information that you've collected about yourself. And I think,
yeah,
I'm always a fan of honesty. I was out for so long before I met my wife that it was like not a real question for us. But I think just honesty is really important. But I think also, if you have hesitated to speak up and like there's a long time lag, I think making it really clear why you were like, what were you afraid of? Like, I think that making yourself vulnerable in this moment, and like, not because you're not trying to keep a secret from someone to hurt them. You've maybe not spoken up because you couldn't figure out how, or because you were so afraid that you would lose them or that they wouldn't, like, to really be vulnerable.
Yeah.
One of the other questions we had early on was, some of the data and the polls seem to say that there's a lot of covering going on. Was that resounding agreement when, we look at our ERGs, when we look at our workplaces, the number of people who openly identify as bi, even within what should be a safe space of the ERGs, just isn't there. So
yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of covering. I know a lot of people who are bi in even my incredibly open work environment, but it doesn't have anything to do with work. It has to do with their home situation. In some cases, their spouse also works. And so by outing themselves, they out their spouse. There's a lot at stake for people, and each individual person has their own reasons for not coming out, but you will definitely find our bi community in your ally space. And, for that matter, they may be, in a same-sex relationship, and they are uncomfortable being true to their bi identity because of the relationship with the spouse. So same idea as an opposite sex relationship. Folks, I have to run because I have to kick off the other session that I'm going to. So I have to run, but I'm going to leave the meeting, but I'll let you guys stay, and then I'll see you at 4:30, hopes.
I'll stay.
Right, thank you, Robin.
Oh my gosh, Robin, your cat's comments, that cracks me up.
He was sitting on the bar.
So we see him move around a lot. He just stayed stationary.
Yeah, she was just standing on one of the keys.
Are there any other questions anyone has?
I want to address the question of coming out.
Okay.
Covering, because I think that there's a big difference between actively pretending to be something you're not and not speaking up.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go to the supermarket and I don't say my sexual orientation and people assume that I'm heterosexual, that's not me hiding, that's them making false assumptions, like they're jumping to conclusions. And that's also true in the workplace, right? If I don't come out and people make assumptions about me based on what they know about my relationship history or just how I present myself physically, that's really, honestly, that should be on them, not on me. If I say that I'm straight and I'm not straight, that's a different thing. But bisexual and bi plus and pan people actually have to deal with that idea that because we so often assume someone's sexual orientation based on the relationship that we know them to be in, that bi plus people, like, you can't just put your partner's picture up at work and the job is not done. Once you do that, like, that doesn't help people understand your sexual orientation. For straight people that works, for lesbian and gay people that works, but for bi plus people, you need more than a picture on your desk. In order to be out, you actually need to use words. And there's also a stereotype that bi identity is unstable. And so you also probably will have to come out over and over. You know, people will say things like, well, I know you called yourself bisexual last year. Do you still identify that way? People don't say that about straight people. People don't ask that question of lesbian or gay people. So that's another challenge of being bi.
For sure. I'm seeing some other comments come through. I witnessed a coworker ask a gay male coworker if he was the husband or the wife. Was stunned. Why, yes.
Yes. Well, my comment when somebody asked me that one question, she said to me, I have a question about your relationship. Which one of you is the wife? I know, which one of you is the husband or something? Which one of you is the man, she said. And I said, actually, neither of us. That's kind of the point. But I think there is that stereotype that people try to take same gender relationships and heterosexualize them, like assign one of them to the man role and one of them to a woman role. But of course, with same gender and with different gender relationships, that doesn't really apply.
I think though, I mean, it's a de-evolution of putting people in boxes. And I think we all still have that tendency. I think it's just part of who we are, and we have to work really hard to break it. And even within our LGBTQ plus community, we are still big fans of boxes. You saw all the terms on the page. Sometimes I just want to put an infinity sign, like there, like, we'll know we've made it if we get away from all the labels and boxes. We're all humans.
I want to read one of the chat comments. Thank you, Morgan. It says, neither of us. I'm the cat and she's the dog.
Oh my gosh. That's funny.
Someone else wrote, LOL, I'm definitely the cat.
As we see this beautiful cat on Robin's lap, at one point it was the tail wrapped up around your nose. It was very cute.
Yeah, that's my Maggie. She's the head of this household.
What do you think, Robin? Do we want to call it a wrap?
Any final questions? I think we might be.
I'm mostly seeing thank yous.
I'm going to save the chat and I'm going to see if there's anything that I think should be shared back into the session. There's a place where we can put files. So if there's if there are any resources or things like that I see in here, I will share them. I will not share personal stuff. But any comments, and if I use any comments, I will take the last names out so that people have complete and total privacy.
Hey, Robin, there was one more question over in Pathable that said, are there policies or practices supporting healthcare we should think about as an employer for the community?
Around bi plus identities?
That's not what it says, but I would apply that layer in your answer.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because actually, I think that generally, like, there's the health, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual are all, similar needs in a lot of ways in terms of actual like formal care. But I wrote this chapter in a book that just came out recently, and the book is called Bodies and Barriers: Queer Activists on Health. And the chapter that I wrote is titled Without Wincing or Clenching: Bisexual People's Experiences with Health Providers. And I did this by asking, I put out a survey on social media, and I think the introduction I said was, if you identify as bi or bi plus, if you identify as bi plus, and in parentheses, I explained what that meant, and have had a negative or positive experience with a health provider, please tell me about it. I'm writing a book chapter. And I got 130 some odd responses, and I categorized them kind of by theme, because there were some things that just repeated over and over. And I used direct quotes from people. And yeah, and so I think that there are some very specific things that bi plus people deal with in healthcare settings. These more be helping people have a good frame and not make certain assumptions and kind of have some cultural competence rather than being maybe not really a formal policy thing. But I think it's really, really, really important that we do think about the healthcare needs of BI+ people. So again, the book is called Bodies and Barriers, Queer Activists on Health. And it's edited by a guy named Adrian Shankar. Oh, Maggie has another comment. And with that, I think that there's no way we could possibly top that comment. So
No.
let's make this the end of the session. I'm just gonna save the chat one more time.
Perfect.
Okay, and we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Erin.